Good evening. What will you do to make the Board of Finance a functioning rather than adversarial board, and one that speaks on behalf of the citizens of Stanford?
Well, thank you very much. I just want to once again thank everybody up here tonight. Everybody at this table is a volunteer and has spent a lot of time and effort working on behalf of the city. And we may not always agree on issues, but we have to agree that everybody here is out to do what they think is best for the city. And I want to thank each and every one of you. That being said, I was quoted in the newspaper saying the Board of Finance wasn't a garden club. And I got an email that said I shouldn't say that anymore. So I'm going to use a different term. It's not a sewing circle, if you will. There's going to be differences of opinion on the Board of Finance. The board controls a $500 million budget. And there's different approaches to how that money is spent and how we should collect it, how much we should charge in taxes. So at the end of the day, when you have 6 people and you have different opinions, you're going to have some headbutting. My position's always been that I don't attack anybody personally. I'm not out to make anybody look bad. I will maintain my position, how I feel in an issue, and I will work in that issue, and I will try to persuade the others to go along with me in that regards. But that being said, I think that's an approach that should be taken, and I will continue to take that approach. And I think we have the right to disagree, but as long as we disagree as gentlemen.
Thank you, Bob.
Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen.
Bob, thank you. John, 1 minute.
Thank you. I think there's a real difference between being able to disagree and being disagreeable. I think there's a real difference between debating and being dishonorable. In terms of the one thing that I can offer for the city and that I have offered for the city, as I sit here this evening, I am the only candidate who's an attorney. I do this for a living. And I have also served as a special master for the Superior Court, where I've helped mediate and resolve disputes. So my job, my training, and also my service on the Finance Board, where I was a former vice chairman, and I worked collaboratively with members of the board on both sides of the aisle, sometimes disagreeing with the mayor, sometimes agreeing with the mayor. I think I have the unique skill set for this time to be able to do that, to serve as the mediator and to serve in that role. Thank you for the question.
John, thank you. David, 1 minute.
I was president of the Board of Reps for 8 years. Some people call it the board of 40 little mayors. I think people having passion is fine. I think it's wonderful. And let me tell you, we had people that had some passionate opinions, and 40 is a lot harder than 6. And I think Scott will agree with me. We had our moments, but we were able to work it through and get things accomplished. And I think it has a lot to do about respecting one another. You can disagree with one another, but you have to respect them. And are you working in good faith? Are you really being honest about trying to solve the problems of the city, or does it appear that you are working towards personal agendas or trying to cut people off and not have their opportunity to pursue the issues that they need to pursue as part of their responsibility? We got through it. We did a good job. I'm proud of what we did. Not always perfect, but I think I can bring some of that talent to the Board of Finance.
Thank you, David. Scott?
Thank you. What I will do to ensure that the Board of Finance operates as an effective body will be exactly what I did when the Board of Representatives unanimously elected me to fill a vacancy in March. And that is to not put personal agenda or partisanship before what's in the best interest of the city of Stamford. I've served the public for 11 years, 10 on the Board of Representatives, and I've always tried to do what I think is in the best interest of the city of Stamford. And I think it's indisputable that since I moved to the Board of Finance, that once again some key issues that were affecting the quality of life in the city of Stamford are moving forward again. I think when people walk into the Board of Finance now, a lot of the past partisanship and rancor is no more there. And yes, we can have differences of opinion and be advocates for those, but we should always behave in a civil manner. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Cynthia?
I'm the only member of, or the only candidate sitting up here who actually doesn't have any experience on the Board of Finance or the Board of Representatives. And I'm probably the one with the least amount of political experience. So what I hope to bring to the board is financial experience. But I will also bring the same respect that everyone talks about. I've been active in my neighborhood. I've worked across party lines with Democrat and Republican representatives to get things accomplished in my neighborhood. I will continue to do that. And I will also support the other board members. When a board member brings forth an issue to put on an agenda or a topic for discussion on the board, I think it is very important to support them. I don't think that any of the board members bring up topics frivolously, and I will support their efforts to advance the agenda of the Board of Finance.
Thank you. Very good.
Like David Martin, I have spent a lot of time on both the Board of Representatives and also the Board of Finance. And I would candidly tell you that the effectiveness of the board really depends on the dynamics of its individual members and the good and not so good intentions that they bring to those meetings. The city fathers, when they set up both fiscal boards, they set them in even numbers. So there are 6 Board of Finance members, there are 40 Board of Reps members. They wanted to ensure that people were working together. They didn't give you an extra vote on one side or another so that you'd have a majority. They really felt that it was important that the boards came together to solve problems with civility, with common sense, and with the good of the people in mind.
Thank you. Joe?
Well, I served on the board for almost 24 years. Previously, I served on the Board of Representatives.
Joe, can't hear you.
Most of the John Mike's what happened? Get a new mic. Now it's on.
Start over, sir.
Most of the years that I served on the Board of Finance, I was in the minority. From the first day that I got on, I made a commitment to the taxpayers that I would hold people accountable for every penny of our tax dollars, of your tax dollars. And apparently, a lot of people don't like the fact that I've been correct about 99% of the time on the exposure of corruption, mismanagement, wasteful expenditures of millions of dollars. Thank you.
Thank you. John, next question goes to you.
What role should the Board of Finance play in the city's day-to-day operations?
2 minutes, sir.
Thank you. I think the Finance Board is a very important board. I've been quoted as saying that the Board of Finance, I think of it as a board of directors. We have 6 people, and we're basically charged with, under the charter, of not only making sure that there's fiscal accountability and responsibility, but it's also to a large degree a policy-making board. The Board of Finance has its role in all aspects of city government, whether that be on the operations side, whether that be on the capital budget side. So, I see it as a triple responsibility. Number one, we have to maintain our costs down. We have to be smart about what we're doing and what we're putting into our budget, just as if all of us were running a business. We have to look at our costs, but we also need to make sure that what we're doing is we're attracting and maintaining the highest quality, the highest level employees for our services. Otherwise, our business isn't going to do too well. I think the second part is keeping an eye on the revenue. The other part of the budget that people don't think about too much and talk about too much is, Stamford is the city that works. Well, you know what? Should work a little harder so that we get revenue from the city, and so we can keep our own personal property taxes down. You know, the more we can do in terms of smart growth, the more we can do in keeping an eye on revenue. For example, the ECS formula, I've been a big advocate now since there's a new committee. You know, we need to fight. There's $8 billion at stake. We now have folks from Stanford that are part of that committee. Let's go after that money. Let's go where the money is. The third prong, I think, is maintaining and controlling our liability. You know, we can have good people, we can make good money as a city, but if we have lawsuits out there and, you know, we're doing all these things, that's part of the control. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. David, 1 minute.
Could you do me a favor and read the question again, sir?
What role should the Board of Education play in the city's day-to-day operations?
Did you change the question? Did you change the question on me? I think the mayor runs the city. The mayor is charged with the responsibility of running the city, and for the various operating decisions and policy decisions, truthfully, I believe that's the Board of Representatives. But the Board of Finance has some unique powers that are given to it which tell you something about its mission. It's given unique powers over setting the mill rate. It's given unique powers over the audit, and those powers are sacrosanct. I believe that when it comes to the financial decisions of the city, when it comes to the bonding strategy, when it comes to what's happening in the tax collector's office, the Board of Finance should exercise responsible control, and if it has to be on a daily basis, then it has to be on a daily basis. But I don't think that's the way it should be. I think the mayor runs the city, and the Board of Finance should be setting policy, monitoring policy, and correcting things when it's necessary.
The role of the Board of Finance overall is to be the stewards of fiscal policy and integrity and soundness for the city. I think the Board of Finance is focusing on budgets, the review of all budgets, capital, Board of Ed, city operating, and outside agencies. As was mentioned before, the Board of Finance does have unique powers to conduct audits when it seems appropriate, and they don't always have to be external, they could be internal. The Board of Finance ultimately sets the mill rate, but I think we have to respect boundaries in the Board of Finance. In recent past, the Board of Finance, in my opinion, has sometimes and often acted outside of what its real responsibilities are per the charter. I've seen an encroachment in the legislative side where I came from, and there's clearly a division between what the Board of Finance can do and cannot do. And I think if we focus on the issues I mentioned, we will have a board that works well. Thank you.
Thank you.
As some of my opponents here have mentioned,
I'm sorry, Cynthia, we're having difficulty hearing you.
okay, as some of my opponents here have mentioned, the Board of Finance does have broad fiscal responsibilities, setting policy and overseeing financial matters of the city. We can't, obviously, we can't micromanage the city, but when we see areas of operation that need to be investigated and where we need to exercise our unique powers to audit and investigate activities, we have a responsibility to the taxpayers to do that. One area in particular, I think, when we talk about day-to-day operations that is lacking right now is the fact that we don't have an internal audit department. That was disbanded during Dan Malloy's administration, and when some of the members here on the DS with me were in positions of power on the Board of Reps and Board of Finance. We need to reinstitute that function. We need to have the internal controls in addition to the external controls.
Thank you.
When you're at the end of the table, a lot of people say what you're going to say, but I will say that John Luisas was very complete in his answer about the Board of Finance. I will add that its broad charge is to ensure that we tax so that we balance the services that people need with their ability to pay. And we do that by helping to craft a reasonable budget and then setting a tax rate that is also reasonable. What the Board of Finance is not, it's not the law department, it's not the HR ability to pay. That's our charter mandated responsibility.
Thank you.
Okay, the Board of Finance, first of all, the mayor runs the city, not the Board of Finance. Let's get that straight. Nor does the Board of Representatives. The Board of Finance is empowered by charter to be the fiscal watchdog of the city of Stamford and our taxpayers. That's our job. When I became chairman 2 years ago, I instituted forensic audits. We passed it, we approved it, they were shelved after I left. That had not been done for many, many years. And the result of that was stealing, $350,000, as you know. The individual's in jail now. There's another, that was in the HR department, Human Resources. That's where the mess was with the insurance issues, millions and millions of dollars of taxpayers' money that went down the tubes, okay, down the drain, flushed. And in the finance department. And I push for forensic audits. That's our job.
Thank you. Scott?
Just a question. I might be confusing debate format, so forgive me if I am.
Please, certainly.
Did the format call for any rebuttal to any response by anyone?
No.
Okay, I just want to make sure I'm confused with another.
I'm sorry if there was confusion about that. Bob, last opportunity, 1 minute.
Yeah, with regards to daily operations, really the devil's in the detail. And as an oversight board, it's important for the members to have an understanding of what the daily operations are so we can better make a choice and decision on how the money is being spent. Just a quick example, a few years ago, I was asked to look at the vehicle maintenance department, and I came back with a report indicating that it was costing us about $500 an hour for every hour a mechanic was working on a vehicle in our maintenance department. And we could certainly subcontract that out for $100 an hour to any repair shop. So there's an example of where that's a day-to-day operation, but as a board member, I was able to go in and identify wasteful government spending and make recommendations to change it. So, yeah, there is a balancing act here. The mayor is in charge of running the city, but this board is an oversight board, and I think we have the right to see what the operations are, and if there's inefficiencies, make suggestions to correct them.
Thank you, sir. First question now to David. 2 minutes to respond.
When will capital projects be evaluated on their own merits and not have special funding mechanisms?
I'm sorry, you're going to have to define what special funding mechanisms are.
Would you repeat that?
These are not my questions, you know, they're
Tax incremental financing, as in Mill River Park.
So basically the question is, would you repeat the question, please?
When will capital projects be evaluated on their own merits and not have special funding mechanisms? And the gentleman I would clarify.
And I would say that we've got two issues confused here. One is the project worth the capital expenditure? And the second issue is how do we actually go out with a bonding strategy? And the question to me seems to confuse those two issues. One issue is this the worthy project that we should spend $10 million or $3 million, whatever the number is? And the other question is how should we bond it to get the maximum savings at minimum risk or an exposure to the city of Stamford? And so in that sense, I would say that all bonding, we should look to the alternatives as to how we can best fund them, period. And so if TIF financing will get us the lowest rate and protect the city of Stamford for the long run, because it has its pluses and minuses, I think, as everyone would understand, then we should go with TIF financing. If we're going to dedicate revenues from the parking machines to a financing bond avenue, then we should consider that. But please don't misconstrue. I'm not one of those that's in favor of that like it's done in some cities. But the financing mechanism should be totally separate from the issue of whether or not it's worth bonding in the first place. The bonding, those decisions should be separate, and I'm willing to consider what you might call creative strategies if it lowers the cost to the city of Stamford, if it doesn't put us in special exposure. That's part of the responsibility of the Board of Finance. Find the ways to lower the costs, period. Now that means TIF financing here, not TIF financing here, revenue bonds behind a parking garage, yeah, fine.
Thank you, sir.
That's where I'm at.
Scott, 1 minute.
Thank you. Again, to separate the question, I think it's a matter of limited dollars when it comes to assessing what the needs are across the total city. And we have to make decisions of where we want to invest in those capital projects. But I think that question is more about TIF perhaps, and maybe folks who don't think it was the right thing to do or not. So let me comment about the TIF funding for Mill River Corridor. In 2001, the Board of Representatives adopted an ordinance that set up a Mill River Corridor District that would fund what Mill River Park is about to become. And it was funded by taking any tax increases from 2001 forward, half of that amount, to go towards the Mill River project. And like David said, and I agree, it's not so much of how we fund it. We're going to fund projects that make sense for the city in the most economical possible way. Thank you.
Thank you. Cindy?
I think the question, as I understand it, is what is the damage to our finances of taking on some of these projects, and what kind of financial burden are we putting on the city by investing millions, tens of millions of dollars in projects for which we don't see any reasonable return on investment, at least in the short term, and particularly during a tough economic climate. I think Old Town Hall might be another example of that, where some funds were diverted to a project that had questionable return on investment. We have problems with the way projects are funded here. We have $80 million worth of capital projects in this city that have ostensibly been funded with bond revenues, but we have no accountability for them. We don't know where those monies went, and our auditors are having a difficult time sorting out our capital projects and the funding for them. And we, as a Board of Finance, need to take those comments from our auditors seriously and address those issues.
Thank you. Mary Lou.
Just to clarify, broadly speaking, the capital budget process goes through the planning board, once it comes from the mayor, through the Board of Finance, and then to the Board of Representatives. So every project is evaluated on its own merit. You know, with respect to TIF funding, Stamford is a big city, and when it wants to do big projects, it has to be creative in its financing, and it has to take into account, again, the interest rates that we have to pay and our ability to repay that debt. I will not, sit here and let people say that the Mill River project is a bad project. I mean, one of the benefits of that, with the last Hurricane Irene several weeks ago, for the first time in a long time, our city streets downtown did not flood, because one of the byproducts of the Mill River project was to take down the dam, and the river is now flowing freely, and we had no flooding in downtown in several hundred years.
Thank you. Okay.
We're talking about the funding. Mill River should be put under a microscope in terms of the funding. Town Hall, the old Town Hall, should also be put under a microscope. It was passed under a majority that was controlled by the mayor, Mayor Malloy at that time. When I became chairman, I looked at the WPCA. That was another project. They were a waste of energy, a $50 to $100 million project. I had a technical committee review it, made up of highly expert, no cost to the city, okay? And they came back and said, look, it's neither economically nor technically feasible. And we killed it. The proof of that is that last week, when they sold a bill of goods to the capital, Pennsylvania, Harrisburg, and they're going bankrupt. They filed Chapter 9. Imagine what would happen to your fees at the WPCA if that project went through.
Thank you, sir. Bob?
Yeah, there has been some major problem in the way that capital bonding and capital funding has been spent over the last 15 years. And Joe Tarzi and I and Kathleen Murphy implemented a project-based bonding procedure on the Board of Finance, a new fiscal policy, which means, and it sounds very simple, but it was foreign to a lot of people, whatever project you bond, that money has to be spent on that project. So if you bond for new piers at the city marina, that money's got to be spent on the city marina. What has happened over the last 14 years is the money was being bonded And that money was being spent at the discretion of the mayor without any oversights by the boards. And we had, as Cindy had mentioned earlier, there's about $80 million out there that nobody knows how it was spent. So we've changed that policy. We're now working on a project-based bonding and capital funding, and that's a huge accomplishment for the board that Joe and I led. Thank you.
Thank you.
You know, I think from a smart financial standpoint, from a smart economic standpoint, you know, take a project like Mill River, you have to look at what's going on, you have to look at the vehicle, and you have to look at the opportunity cost and the potential revenue. You know, Mill River Park, we have a situation where we're building a new park, it's improving funding, it's bringing people to downtown, it's going to be there for our next generation. And oh, by the way, they just had the groundbreaking on Saturday, and GE Capital was there, investing hundreds of thousands of dollars. The corporations that everybody says doesn't give back to the city is giving back to the city. So in that case, you had a vehicle where an economist would tell you, a financial person would tell you, you're using the TIF funding as a vehicle to not have it be part of your general obligation bonds, to help you with your AAA rating, so that doesn't be part of that, and you're doing something positive for the city, which has a great opportunity cost. Why do you think in New York City at Central Park, all of the high-rises are built around Central Park, and those are the highest value properties that are going to help bring in revenue? My second part. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Scott, first opportunity, question, 2 minutes.
How will you address the underfunded city pension plan? And do you know the size of the unfunded balances?
Regarding the pension, it's part of an overall bigger topic of structural costs. And when we look at structural costs, which is medical insurance, pension, other insurance like workman's liability, that's about a $95 million number this year citywide. Another way to think about it, of a $440 million operating budget, those structural costs represent 23% of the operating budget. And again, to drill down even lower, before a curb is fixed, a road is paved, a police respond or fire respond to an alarm, those are fixed costs. So almost 25 cents of every tax dollar are for those structural costs. In terms of the pension, we're about funded at 94% level of our pensions. We're in far better shape than most communities. But how you're really going to get to these structural costs is really a key question. And structural costs need to be addressed when you're talking about union negotiations for contracts. And it's not a matter of declaring war on city employees or unions. It's to recognize the financial realities of what we can and cannot afford, very much the way we manage our household budgets, by common sense, practical decisions. It's very clear that it is not sustainable. Those structural costs are going to double projected in another 2 years. So we're going to need to do things on a pension basis. Instead of a defined, there'll be a contribution made. So the city is not subject to wild swings in markets. We're going to have to look at the contributions that city employees make to health care. It's clear that business cannot continue as usual. That's one of the key things that I've been pointing out as I talk to folks around the city, that we need to address our structural cost, and every union contract is up for negotiation now. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia, and I just want to say we're very appreciative of how each of you is respecting the time for the others.
The city is smothering under the cost of some of our pension plans and medical plans. I think, as Scott pointed out, this is a huge portion of our budget, and the Board of Finance does have the power to approve or disapprove what transpires in these union contracts, and we simply cannot afford to keep paying the rates that we're paying for our medical plans. And I think we even need to look at whether or not some of the retiree medical plans can be sustained any longer at all. So I must admit, this is a topic that I don't have a lot of the statistics at my fingertips, and haven't been as intimately involved with them with other board members, but I assure you I'm a quick study and a student who will take the challenge seriously of getting underneath those and really understanding what our options are with regard to the pension plans and the medical plans.
Thank you.
I'm the only member of the current Board of Finance that has human resource experience and has employee relations and labor relations experience. We, in fact, were the first board to begin to look at some of the structural costs and to begin to warn the city that these high costs were coming down the road. As a matter of fact, I was one of the people on the board to lead that fight. The one thing I will tell you is that we do not in any way approve city contracts. We can ask for updates on negotiations in executive session, but the Board of Finance does not approve city contracts. It's the Board of Representatives that do that. We do offer, however, an advisory opinion telling them whether or not we approve the contract based solely on the city's ability to pay. Again, that's a very narrow focus for the Board of Finance.
Mary Lou is correct. I was the other person, by the way, she's alluding to. The last administration was making deals with some of the unions. In other words, you know, the city won't put in its contribution for a year and this and that. I argue that case. The best educated voter is one who goes and listens to the tapes. Go and listen to the last 8 or 10 years worth of tapes. Then you see what points were being made by whom on the board. Then you see when the board was working, regardless of who controlled the board. But let me tell you something. The Board of Representatives, on September 2nd of 2008, after the Board of Finance render a negative advisory opinion, right? Mr. Martin was president. They voted to give the non-union members a 30% increase over a few years. Okay, this is when the world was falling apart.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, I think the chickens are going to come home to roost on the city pension plans. Some of us on the board have been expressing our concerns for years about this. And a couple of things. Our pensions were underfunded under the Loy administration. And the second big problem that nobody's talking about is how the actuaries have looked at the numbers and the rate of returns on our capital investments. And they're using numbers that may have been dialed 10 or 15 years ago, but in this market, in this day and age, they're actually quite high. So there's actually going to be more of an underfunding than you think. There is some positive news. We have been working with the administration on changing from defined benefit plans to defined contribution plans. That will take time. We have to work through the union contracts in that regards, but it is moving in the right direction there. Thank you.
Thank you.
When I was on the board, this issue came up and it was fought for, and what I did is I joined the OPEB board and I volunteered and I became vice chairman of that board, and I rolled up my sleeves and we took the situation you know, by the hand, and we met with our financial folks. We looked at the Board of Education budget, we looked at the city budget, and we said, you know, what are we going to do about maximizing our money? What are we going to do about maximizing our investments? This is a situation that is present. How are we going to make it as best as we can? We have some opportunities coming up as they come up with the contracts. I mean, as was mentioned, the Board of Finance doesn't directly negotiate those contracts, but we have advisory opinions that we have given positive or negative in the past, and I think we look at that. But again, don't forget that if this city is just going to say no, if this is going to be a city that does nothing and doesn't have a vision, we're not going to increase our revenue sources, which won't help deal with these issues. Thank you.
So when I left office, the SURF board, the SURF pension fund, of which I was a trustee, had a surplus position. And it might have been 12% or 11%, 9%, something of that nature. It had a surplus position. I don't know that it has a surplus position now. The custodians were close, but a little bit shy, as I recall. The fire and police were close, but a little bit shy. And we were in a unique position, and most cities were considerably underfunded, and we were close, or in the case of the board that I served, actually slightly ahead. The big hole that we had, and we still have, is the what is referred to as OPEB. To be more precise, is the obligations for the health benefits for retirees. that were signed up by mayors and board of representatives perhaps before any of us were born, and have continued on and continued on. And at this point, that is a substantial obligation, and I was on the board that passed the ordinance that required the city to start funding that obligation. And we've fallen down on that, and we need to correct that. Thank you.
Thank you. Cynthia, next question to you, 2 minutes.
What is your perception of the old town hall, and what would you like to see happen?
Well, my perception of the old town hall is that it's a glorious building, and what I would like to see happen is to see it rented out so it would start generating revenue and stop being a liability to the city. I don't know that the Board of Finance has much control over that, but I know that it's critical to relieving some of the pressure that we feel in our budgets due to the money that goes toward it.
I agree with Mrs. Reeder that the town hall is in fact a beautiful building and an integral part of Stamford's past. It was right to try to preserve it. It was right to try to bring it back to life. And I believe that we will in fact be successful in that effort. Getting a tenant, the right kind of tenant for the old town hall is an effort that everybody should be involved in. As you may or may not know, Mr. Kohlenberg was in fact on the committee that looked at the old town hall, its renovation, its exploration for potential tenants, and also the funding process. So he should be able to shed some light for us on that effort.
Thank you.
I agree that we needed to renovate the building. However, I think the back of the building is a monstrosity. Reminds me of what they did to the library years ago. You go and look at the back, where Bank Street and all that. I think we need, as I said earlier, my comments, I think that's another area we need to look at, put it under the microscope. I think the numbers there don't make sense. I think the city, by the past administration, was sold a bill of goods, and that's another problem we're going to have. So, let's lay the cards on the table. This city should not have the financial problems that it's facing now and will face in the future, which will restrict the funding that we'll need for other very important projects in the future, unless you want to see double-digit tax increases.
Thank you.
Yeah, there was a big debate several years ago as to what to do with the old town hall, and the options were to sell it, to tear it down, or to renovate it. So the majority of people in town said, we want the old town hall. It's a piece of our city's history. So I was asked to sit on the board, the renovation board, and the plan was pretty straightforward, and it seemed like a very sound plan at the time. Renovate the building. We had some historic tax credits that we had some money from the state, some other forms of financing was available, and the projections based on the rental income that could be generated from the building more than covered the expenses, the capital expenses needed to renovate it. So it was a sound plan. Unfortunately, like a lot of other plans that were developed in 2006, 2007, when 2008 came around and the real estate market collapsed, it basically created a situation where we can't find a tenant at this point. But I'm sure the market will correct itself, and at some point in the future it will be rented, and it will be a piece of Stamford history on display for everybody to see. Thank you.
I think the old town hall is an example of when that issue came before the finance board, and I was on the board at that time, Bob was on the board, Mary Lou was on the board, Tim Evazia and Joe Tarzia. We all worked together on that issue. I mean, that's an example of an issue that came before us that was, it was a tough issue. You had to look at it, you had to analyze it, you had to scrutinize what the long-term effects would be, how much money are we getting from the state. And you know what? We all worked together on that. I mean, we debated it, we discussed it, and it's an example of good government. That is the type of thing we need right now. We desperately need good government back in Stamford, Connecticut. We don't operate in a bubble here. We have to compete with other other cities, other towns, other states, and we have to bring back good government. The Old Town Hall, I've heard there is interest in that. You know, some of the technological companies, film companies, things like that, people are looking at that building and are interested in that. And the back of the building looks like it looks because they needed it to be different, and they were able to get non-city tax dollars to make that design. Thank you.
I can tell you the price of repairing the roof that was caving in. I can tell you the price of trying to stop the mold and mildew that was in the basement. What I can tell you is that preserving the Old Town Hall as a piece of Stanford's history was, as the commercial says, priceless. From the moment it started, it looked to me like we were never going to get a return on investment of that particular property. So should we sell it off to somebody who's going to raise it to the ground? And I considered it, and I decided that this was a piece of Stanford history, a piece of beautiful architecture, and we needed to save it. And we're struggling because, as some other people have said, yes, the economy has dealt with some nasty blows, but I'm proud of what we've done to save it. It's not just sitting there rotting anymore. It is costly, and I hope that the economy returns and we can make it more financially attractive. But I still think it's priceless, and I'm in favor of keeping it and always have been.
There was a fundamental decision the city had to make, whether to preserve part of the history of Stamford and renovate Old Town Hall or not, and I'm thankful that they did. And the Board of Representatives actually passed an ordinance to transfer, to create a redevelopment authority, and then transfer ownership of Old Town Hall to the redevelopment authority.
Scott, some folks have indicated that. Thank you.
Okay. The Board of Representatives adopted an ordinance that actually created a redevelopment authority and for 7 years transferred ownership of that building. Everyone should know in 2014 the city will once again own that building. In the current year's operating budget, there's about $250,000 to cover any unanticipated operating expenses. I believe the building does have two tenants. I believe one is it's relevant, and I've forgotten the other. There's two tenants. It's relevant. So I think it has fallen victim to the collapse of the real estate market, the financial market, and when the economy does recover, hopefully the building becomes rented and it can sustain itself. Thank you.
Thank you. And also, I thank the person in the back of the room who let me know that you couldn't hear. I need you to do that for me. Give me a signal, put your hand up here. Thank you. First question to Mary Lou, 2 minutes.
What changes do you favor in the Stanford City Charter, which will be up for review next year?
I believe that the city has a responsibility to look at some of the boards and commissions, although I wouldn't necessarily think about getting rid of them. I'm very much opposed, for example, to the end of the Urban Renewal Commission, but I think there might be some opportunities to consolidate. I think that the Charter Revision Commission should look at things like city departments and how they function. I also believe that they should look at roles and responsibilities, and especially with respect to jobs, to make sure that the work that the city needs to be done in the present is aligned with the responsibilities of those people, and that their skills and talents are more closely aligned.
Thank you.
City charter changes. First of all, I think the Board of Representatives, the Board of Representatives needs to do a better job in overseeing some of the commissions and boards. About a month ago, since I'm on the RTC, chairman of the candidates committee, one of the candidates said, look, we haven't met. The Commission on Aging hadn't met in over 3 years with over 21,000 seniors in this town. Figure that one out. I think the Board of Finance should be a 3-year term, and I said that in 95, I think it was. I think the Board of Reps should go back to 2 years, and I think the Mayor's office should be 2 years. Hold us all accountable. Hold our feet to the fire. That's how you get good government. not people who get in office and then they come to you 4 years later and promise you something. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I really believe that in the charter revision, they should address this whole issue about the ethics complaints and how they're handled in Stamford. Right now, as volunteer board members, whether appointed or elected, we're facing a personal financial liability if somebody lobs a false allegation against us. And if anybody has served on a board commission, you're typically indemnified against any type of litigation brought against you in the course of your duties. As it stands now, we had the chairman of the Board of Finance that was facing $100,000 in legal fees for defending his good name. I myself was facing $35,000 in legal fees, and all the charges turned out to be fabricated. So that is something that the charter revision has to look at. They have to indemnify public servants, especially volunteers, so that they cannot be leveraged, they cannot be extorted, and they cannot be forced to vote a certain way in fear of retribution by this financial attack on them personally.
Please, ladies and gentlemen, I ask you to respect the wishes to use the time for questions rather than applause. Okay, John?
I'm not going to go there on the ethics charges. Let me say this, with respect to the charter, I actually serve as counsel for another municipality, and in my role and my skill set as a lawyer, I've actually been through charter revision before. I think the most important thing that you need to focus on is what can we do to make sure that there are clearly defined roles between the different forms of the government. We have the mayor's office, the board of finance, and the board of representatives. So every time the charter revision comes up, it should be analyzed and scrutinized to make sure that those roles are specific, that those roles are defined, that those powers are defined, so that you don't have potential infighting. The worst thing for government is when government shuts down. Maybe better to not have government than to have government that cannot function. And in the present state, we're in a recession, but we need to be ready when that recession turns. Stamford needs to be ahead. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. First, the Charter Revision Commission has to make a fundamental decision. Is it going to look for fundamental change in the charter of the city of Stamford? Is it going to look for incremental change? Now, those incremental changes can be quite important, but I, for one, believe that Stamford is probably the most successful, diverse city in this country. And part of that is because of our charter. And it has some flaws and needs to have some things corrected, but I'm not looking for radical change like eliminating the Board of Finance. And that is an item of discussion. Let me instead go to, and there are a series of issues which we could discuss, but let me go to some that are more relevant to the Board of Finance specifically. First of all, the Board of Finance should have more authority over approval of labor contracts. Right now, it has almost none. And secondly, I believe the Board of Finance should have authority over the approval of the Director of Administration and the appointment of the Controller and the Treasurer. Right now, it has none. On the other hand, I believe that the Board of Finance should not have unlimited terms. Now, this is something I've been opposed to term limits, but I am beginning to wonder if after 12 years we should get rid of people who begin to get appointed for political purposes, and they should have a term limit for the Board of Finance. Thank you.
Last charter revision, my recollection is the mayor became a non-voting member of the Board of Education. With the Board of Education budget comprising about 56% of the total operating budget, I think it's appropriate that the person who's the CEO of the city be a voting member of the board. So when we go to the committee meetings, I'm often in amazement how certain members of the board will say, we have to constantly reduce the city side and almost ignore the educational side of the budget. So I think when you're mayor, you should be given the power, because when the bills go out for tax increases, the mayor is ultimately the one who is looked at saying this is what the spending and tax increases. So I would be in favor and hope that we do look at allowing the mayor to be a voting member of the Board of Education. Thank you.
Thank you. Cynthia, 1 minute.
Yes. There are a number of things that need to be changed in the charter. Obviously, there's some silly things in there, such as the evening that a board should meet and for how long it should meet, things like that. But I think some of the real issues have to do with, as someone else mentioned, how the charter relates to the Board of Finance. And I looked at the videotape of the Charter Revision Committee, and I was a little concerned about some of the dialogue that could potentially lead to diminishing the role of the Board of Finance. So I think the Board of Finance will no doubt need to keep an eye on that. I think another issue that's really important to the city, it was a bit of a hot potato, is fire services. What will transpire with regard to charter revisions and how our fire services are structured in the city? It has a great impact on the cost of fire services and the quality of fire services, the public health and safety of all the residents of Stamford. And when David talked about incremental versus large changes, I don't think on that one we can afford to make an incremental change.
Thank you. Joe, next question's to you, 2 minutes.
Boy, can you bring me a beer? Are you old enough? Okay. How do you see the Board of Finance's role in follow-up on major capital projects?
Oh my gosh, that's a great question. You know, when I became chairman, with the help of Kathleen Murphy and Bob Kohlenberg, who was the vice chairman at that time, what we did was we implemented a system where each project was confined to whatever specific amount of dollars was spent, okay? Was approved, excuse me. And that we also looked at auditing these projects. You know, the SUT, the transit, project down there is millions of dollars over budgeted. We were promised that they would look at it. After I left office, everything dropped. There have been no audits, no review. So the capital projects need to be addressed in a way that you can put the dollar to the project. What happened in the 90s under former Mayor Malloy, what he did was he bundled it, and I fought it on the Board of Finance. I did not get the support. I said, you can't allow the mayor to just get, let's say, $50 million approval on the capital projects, and then decide within that $50 million to move the money around. And that's what he did. They decided where they put the money, where they wanted to put the money, how many clerks of the works they wanted, and where. And of course, there's issues with that. At least I have issues. So it's one of the reasons why we have a $500 million debt in this town. And you know what? Our AAA rating was dropped by 1 notch. That's under their leadership that they're bragging about. Now, what can I tell you? I kept reminding them continuously, go and listen to the tape, listen to Joe Tarzia, saying they're going to drop our rating. They're going, wait and see what happens. The good times are going to not be here forever.
Thank you, sir. Bob, 1 minute to respond.
Yeah, the capital has definitely been a problem, and Joe Tarzia, myself, and Kathleen Murphy pushed through, like I mentioned earlier, project-based capital funding, where now, if you're going to capitalize a project, it's going to be identified in the funding they're going just to that project. I'll give you a quick example. I guess about 10 years ago, the city marinas were promised new docks. So, of course, in true government fashion, they went and they raised the fees on all the boat owners in anticipation that these new docks were going to come along. Well, the dock money was bonded, it was brought in, but it was used on other projects. And that's a prime example. I think right next door there was some, at West Beach, there was some soccer fields that were built with, who knows, it could have been the marina money. Nobody knows where the money went or how it got there. So it is a major problem. We have corrected it under the leadership of Joe and I. And when I'm back on the board next year, I'll continue to monitor that and work on it. Thank you.
Yeah, when I was on the finance board, the bundling in the capital projects is something that I spoke out about. I didn't like that, and actually Joe did join me on that, and I've also voted on issues where Bob and I agreed on. But one thing I didn't do is I didn't go and shut down city government because I didn't get my way. I have come up with a new initiative called the Little Things Mean in Law Initiative on the capital projects. There are 6 members on the finance board. We take our city, we break it up into neighborhoods, and then each member of the finance board is more accountable and responsible throughout the year for different projects. As you're going through a neighborhood, an area, you take a look, you call people up, you talk to them about it. Bob mentioned about ideas he had about, making things better with the motor vehicles. Let's, throughout the year, be better at communicating and keeping an eye on what's going on with our capital projects. And there's no reason why, as Board of Finance members, we can't do that, and we shouldn't be doing that, because the capital budget comes to us once a year. And then once we approve it, we usually don't know what happens. That's a new initiative. Thank you.
David?
It's been a while. Can you read the question again?
Okay. Have to find it again. The question concerned follow-up on decisions you've already made on projects.
Yeah, but basically, should they be audited, or what was the question?
How do you see the Board of Finance's role in follow-up on major capital projects?
And the answer is yes. We've confused a number of issues here as we've gone around the table. First of all, we have the capital projects budget, and there was an issue of bundling, and the record will show that I was one who was not the rubber stamp of the bundling. In fact, I wrote a memo to the Board of Finance saying I would honor any separation of the projects. I did the same thing on the Board of Reps. We actually had a vote to separate one of the projects because I thought it was a problem. I thought that bundling activity was a problem. I stood against it, and yet there was some bundling that occurred. That is, again, a separate issue than the actual financing, and we're confusing issues here. You know, if money was spent where it wasn't supposed to be spent, then by gosh, there's a serious audit problem. Absolutely. And so the real question though is, should the Board of Finance audit capital projects? Yes, that's its responsibility. All of them? No. It should figure out which ones it makes sense to audit and how to do that constructively and efficiently, so that we make certain we do the right thing.
Thank you.
Just want to comment on the credit rating so we don't leave this building and think we're in a state of panic. Standard & Poor's has issued a AAA, the highest investment grade credit rating in the city of Stamford. It's true that Moody's has a AA1, which is second highest. And the reason is because of our rainy day fund reserve, which is $9 million. Let's be clear that the reason, there's a decision we make as a city. Do we want to increase the percent of our contribution towards the long-term debt for OPEB, which is medical insurance for retirees, of which we're now at 60%, or do we want to take that money and put it into the rainy day fund? So it's a discussion that people can have different opinion. So I don't want people to leave the room thinking, oh my God, the sky is falling, because it's simply not true about our credit rating. In terms of capital projects, I hear people talk about debt. We spend too much money. The debt we're carrying in this year's budget of debt service, $42 million, represents about 10% of the operating budget. And there are capital projects that we have to do across the city that touch everybody who live and work here. And yes, the Board of Finance should have a review of capital projects against issuance and how they're doing and the status.
Thank you, sir.
With regard to the how, I think the question was about how the board would address the post-approval process of capital budgets, right? One way I think that's really important is when new appropriations come before the board, that it looks at where that money is coming from. Because of this new project-based bonding, we can't afford to be approving projects that aren't already in the budget. So we can only approve reappropriations, taking the money from one project and assigning it to another. I think that while Mr. Luiza's suggestion about going around the neighborhoods is one that appeals to some people, I don't think that is the job of the Board of Finance. I think we have to be looking to the operations department, the traffic engineering department, the various departments that are implementing capital projects to prioritize their projects, which is something that I don't think is done very well. So those are a couple of things that we can do in addition to auditing expenditures that we see.
Thank you. Okay. Very good.
You know, while Mr. Tarzia and Mr. Kohlenberg are having a good time kind of slapping themselves on the back for all of the good work, let me just clarify that we lost our AAA credit rating when Mr. Tarzia was chairman of the board. He was also a long-time vice chairman of the audit committee, somewhere between 7 or 8 years, I think, Joe. Mr. Kohlenberg is our current audit committee vice chair. So these things happened under their watch as well. So let's be clear about that. The other thing about funding capital projects, while it might sound very good to take funds and assign them to a particular project, the city needs to have a little bit of wiggle room in its capital funding so that when matching funds become available, when stimulus money becomes available, we have the money ready on the city side to take advantage of that alternate non-taxpayer funding.
Thank you. Bob, I think we have time for one more question for everybody, leading off with you.
2 minutes.
How will you deal with the problem of police overtime?
Are you sure we have time for more questions? Actually, you know, that's really, police overtime is driven by the contract the police have with the city of Stamford. And our situation is that at the current time we have far few police officers than we should. When I joined the board, I think in 2003, we had about 320 police officers. Right now, I think we have about 265 in that area that are active officers. So the situation is that you have a mandatory minimum 20 officers on the street at all times. And if you don't have enough officers to actually fill those slots, you have to hire back officers that are off duty and pay them overtime to perform those duties. So the problem we have right now is we simply don't have enough police officers. I've been a proponent of hiring what they call lateral hires, where we go to another department in another area of the state and hire a fully trained officer to come and start right away. The problem with hiring rookies, so to speak, or people without that type of background, is it takes a full year between the time you hire somebody and the time they actually go out and start working as an officer. So the problem we have is, yes, we're understaffed on the department. Number two, we're constrained by very strict contract rules, and those are rules that have been negotiated over years. And should there be some changes to those contracts to help the taxpayer? Absolutely. But again, as a Board of Finance member, we simply can advise the mayor on what he can do, and we really have no say in those negotiations.
Thank you. 1 minute to each of the rest, and then when Joe finishes, we'll go into closing statements, 2 minutes of each person.
Great, thank you. You know, the concept of lateral hires is very common in the legal world. When I was vice chairman of the finance board, it was during that time where a lot of folks were also coming back from the military. So I actually pushed for that. You know, I remember having conversations with the chief. Let's look to get lateral hires. Let's look to other cities where they have experienced police officers. Let's get them in here, because I think we were all hearing the same thing. You know, what's going on with the hiring and where are we? With respect to overtime, there is a balance between having officers which have, you know, full-time contracts and benefits, and then the overtime payment. So there is a balance, there is a sweet spot when you're dealing with how many, you know, police officers you have and what the overtime costs are. We're not there yet. I mean, when I was vice chairman, I was pushing, we need more police officers, and let's get lateral hires in place. And if you look at the tapes or the minutes of the board, you'll find that. So I think it's an important issue. Thank you.
Thank you.
At the risk of losing all time on police overtime, I want to talk about AAA bond rating for a second. No, the sky isn't falling, but the question is, why did the sky come down any bit at all? For 20 years, we've had a AAA bond rating, both under Republican mayors and Democratic mayors, and the only time when we were ever put on watch was when we had a 3-3 board and there was a stalemate and some antics going on the Board of Finance. Now we've had a board that's been changed, and it's been made Republican, and I'm not trying to make this a Republican thing, but guess what? Now we've lost that AAA bond rating. We didn't get anything for it. It didn't save us any money, it just cost us money. And the truth is that we've had an outside objective party come in and basically tell us that we're not quite as financially secure and financially sound as we used to be. We need to fix that. And if I'm on the Board of Finance, I'm going to say to the Director of Administration, listen, 2 weeks from now, I want you to come in and tell us how we're going to get this back. Don't tell me it's about rainy day funds. We didn't have rainy day funds 20 years ago, but we did have a AAA bond rating.
Thank you, sir.
I think as a member of the Board of Finance, it's important to be able to add. So the board is not controlled by any one party right now. There are 3 Republicans, 2 Democrats, and 1 independent. Regarding police overtime, it's not just a matter of what the contract stipulates, but we're now looking at how is overtime deployed? Who gets it? At what rate do they get it? And in fact, I'm the chair of public safety, and there was a selection committee of which Mary Lou and I were members for the Board of Finance, and we've hired an outside company to come in and study the structure of the police department to determine what are the drivers of overtime. Some of the things we need to address in the contract negotiation is move away from things like paying people minimum 4 hours for showing up and doing 10 minutes worth of work. When you hire somebody to do a job at your house, and they tell you it's $40 an hour, and they stay for 2, they don't ask for 160, they're going to ask for the 2 hours worth of work, and that's the same type of thing we should be doing as we address contracts. Thank you.
I really don't have anything to add to what Scott just said about the police overtime. But on the AAA rating, I would like to. We lost that rating because the administration for many years, the Malloy administration, didn't provide good guidance to rating agencies and made some promises with regard to what we would put in reserves, and we didn't meet those promises. Now, they downgraded us a notch. It's not the end of the world. It was a message. It was a message that said that we need to do a better job. It's not costing the city a lot of money either. On a $40 million bond rating, it's about $40,000. And the truth of the matter is that rating's probably going to come back, not because of anything we do to the reserves, but probably because the agencies are going to look at whether or not municipalities need to maintain those reserves. So, on the bond issue, I hope that we can bring that to rest.
Thank you.
One of the things that the general public does not know is that when the city was talking to the rating agencies about the city's rating, we had a relative of a member of the Board of Finance call up Moody's and tell them that the city's rating should be downgraded. Can you believe that? We had a member of our community who pays taxes who called up Moody's and said, you should downgrade us. And in fact, they did. That doesn't help you, that doesn't help me, that doesn't even help the person who made the call. This is just another example of bad government, bad intentions, and an opportunity just to do damage to the city. So I want you to be aware of that.
Thank you. Bring us home, Joe.
Let's get back to the police contract, huh? It's the most convoluted contract you'd ever want to read. When you can't sleep at night, get a copy of that and you'll find out. For years I fought on this board. I was probably one of the few people, if not the only at times, who voted against those contracts. I'll tell you, it's a mess, okay? And you know, they get paid overtime from the time they leave the house, even if they live 50 miles away. We have one person, I think, who lives in, used to at least, in Long Island. No rush to get here, obviously, if you're going to pay time and a half with minimum. Now, I see Mr. Fred Flynn out there, he's the Director of Administration, probably one of the hardest working members of any administration in my career. Okay, we don't always get along on every issue, but let me tell you something. He inherited a mess, a big mess. The untold story about what the city was like when he came into office.
Thank you,
okay?
Ladies and gentlemen, we're at the point where we have closing statements of 2 minutes. I'm sorry. Yes, 2 minutes each. And Bob, would you be?
Why don't you start that out for a while?
Sure. Okay. Joe, are you prepared with starting? Or would you like to pass on the honors point first?
Can I have another beer?
Closing statement, 2 minutes. Joe.
Our closing statement. Well, first of all, let's go back to when I became chair. During the campaign, about 2 years ago, Mayor Pavia, candidate Pavia, promised that he would do, within 100 days, he would do forensic audits of every major department of the city. Now, one thing about me is, I do what I promise. So I became chairman, and I pushed through the board with the help of, obviously, 4 votes we had, to do forensic audits. I saw the stealing that was going on, and it was proven correct. I saw the stuff that was going on in the Office of Operations, metals and all that stuff, proven correct for years and years. Everybody else knew about it, but you know what? It was Joe Tarzia that had to deal with the problem. And so what happened? Then I realized that even some of the administration members didn't like the idea that we were going to look at some of these departments. The Board of Reps leadership said, uh-oh, that may be bad news. So what happens? They all ganged up and said, let's get rid of this guy. Who does he think he is? What does he think? He represents the taxpayers in this city? What's his problem? Okay, so we had $350,000 that was stolen. The guy's in jail now, probably watching television. You've got the guy, you know, another one in the finance department. You got the HR department was a mess. Okay, and then you had, of course, you know, what was going on in the Office of Operations. And by the way, there have been no audit since. Nothing is planned. Okay, now, taxes, let me tell you folks, vote your pocketbook, because in the past 2 years, your taxes were under 2% increase. Look at the history in this city since when I was on the board. When the other side, and I don't want to start picking names here, they control the board, you got a 5% tax increase average every year. When we had a split board, it was about 2%. And let me tell you, the future doesn't look too good if the right makeup of the board does not get elected.
Thank you, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, this election is about leadership. It's about, I'm sorry, stop that clock while I fix the mic.
Starting over.
Start over.
Sure, start over time.
As I said, this election is about leadership. It's about elected individuals who are willing to work together for the good of the city. And this is especially true when times are tough, as they are now. You know, I'm a little bit of a linear thinker, so bear with me for a minute. I'd like us to think about Stanford's past and how it's connected to Stanford's future. You know, when we recall the high points in Stanford history, times of growth and prosperity and reimagining, good things always happen when government worked together in a highly collaborative way. And let me offer just a couple of examples. When we think about Yale in town, now for those members of the senior men's club, you remember when Yale in town was here and it gave Stanford a lot of jobs. When they packed up and moved away, Stanford went from a manufacturing town, kind of a New York bedroom community, and we had to find a way to reinvent Stanford. So the city fathers at that time, Mayor Claps and the fiscal boards, they put together an urban renewal plan that transformed our downtown and took it from empty to bustling. So when people work together, we all win and the city thrives. And then we think about Cove Island. You'll also remember there was a time when the electrical utility wanted to buy Cove Island. And Mayor Mayors at that time and the fiscal boards, they made it a point, and those were tough financial times, by the way, but they made it a point to buy the property. We all won. Fiscal responsibility is not just about saying no, but it's about knowing when to say yes and when to consider creative ideas. Good ideas are worth looking at and working together to bring about.
Thank you, Mary Lou.
I'd like to thank the Senior Men's Association and the Hibernian Society for having us, and I want to thank all of you for coming here to hear more about my position and the positions of my opponents. I'm the only candidate here who's not running based on political experience. I'm also the only candidate who's not affiliated with a political party. I'm running on my financial experience. I have an MBA in corporate finance. I have more than 20 years of experience in the financial world. and I work with financial officers and treasurers on a daily basis. But I'm also running with a lot of determination, and it's a determination to change how our tax dollars are spent and how they're managed. We have a real management issue in the city, particularly when it comes to fiscal matters. And I'm running with a determination to ensure that there's more accountability and more transparency in the way that tax dollars are spent. I feel that under the Daniel Malloy administration, that there was a damaging relaxation of financial controls. The internal audit department was disbanded. We also experienced double-digit tax increases at times, but although the city's internal audit department hasn't been recreated, it has finally hired a new external auditor, that for the first time in many, many years. And when I'm on the board, I will take to heart the recommendations of those auditors, and they will provide the guidance and help set the priorities, and that includes ensuring that the city institutes reliable cash controls and cash processes. That means checks and balances. It means accounting for this $80 million in bond proceeds that had turned into a big piggy bank for everyone. And as I said before, providing more clarity and transparency. I don't have all the answers, but I am a quick study. I'm a hard worker. I will do my homework, I will ask questions, I will ask your questions, and mine, and I will support the other members of the board who have tough questions.
Thank you.
I began my public service in 2001 when I was elected to the Board of Representatives. For 9 of my 10 years, I served on the fiscal committee, so I've been involved with the budget from the beginning of my public service. I also served as deputy minority leader from 2005 to 2011. I was co-chair of public safety, co-chair of operations, member of transportation and appointments committees. Having served on diverse committees gave me a better understanding of how all the city departments work in concert to deliver the core and key services to the city of Stamford. In March of 2011, I was unanimously elected to fill the vacancy when Joe Tarzi resigned from the Board of Finance. It's fair to say that the Board of Finance was at a logjam. The people's business wasn't moving forward. It was filled with rancor, discord, and a dysfunctional atmosphere. When I moved over, I think I played a pivotal role in getting back to the issues that really matter to the city of Stamford. And I didn't do this because I waved a magic wand or any smarter than anybody else on the board. I did it by reaching out and working with people on both sides of the aisle who, like me, don't have a personal agenda, are not into partisan politics, but were simply interested in doing what is in the best interest of the city of Stamford. We have enough of partisanship in Washington. I'm going to continue to do what I can at the local level to try to rebuild a country so the public has confidence in its leaders and what the government does. My pledge to you is to continue to reach out and work with whatever solution is the best without regard to any party. I think, again, we need to look at managing the city's finances the same way each of you sits down with your family members and decides what you can afford to spend and how to best spend it. It's always about evaluating issues on their merits and thinking what is the right decision to make for the city of Stamford. I'm looking forward to continuing my public service on November the 8th. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott.
First, I'd just like to say a couple of years ago when I was running for mayor, I had the opportunity to speak to the Senior Men's Association. I was in these halls for more than once, and I just wanted to thank both organizations for inviting me back and for hosting this. And I think you're part of what makes democracy work by doing this. But turning to the Board of Finance in my closing remarks, I believe you deserve a no-nonsense Board of Finance that ensures fiscal accountability and financial integrity. But amid a swirl of ethics complaints and lawsuits and counter-lawsuits and a whole lot more, in the meantime, our AAA bond rating has dropped. There have been problems discovered in accounting for labor contracts. We didn't seem to want to get on it right away. And we've slipped in funding our long-term financial obligations. So let me quote the Advocate from July 28th, talking about the Board of Finance. Right now, it's a mess. There's so much to untangle, it's hard to know where to begin in the process of restoring public trust. The simple truth is, the Board of Finance has taken a significant turn for the worse, and we have to get it on track. Now, I'm known to be passionate and I'm certainly no rubber stamp, as people know me know, but I know the difference between finger pointing and actually solving problems. As president of the Board of Representatives, in that organization, I ran on average 15% below my budget for 8 years straight and significantly increased transparency. The video recordings that are now made of all elected boards was what I started and what I instituted. I wrote Stanford's purchasing ordinance, considered one of the best in Connecticut. I was instrumental in the successful formation of the Stanford Emergency Medical Services, considered one of the best in New England. I was the person that demanded the city conduct well water testing that led to the discovery of pesticide contamination in many wells. And finally, I have professional experience in financial management and capital budgeting. I'm a small business owner and serve as CFO of my company. I'm not here to take sides in the past tangles of the Board of Finance. I'm here to ensure that you have fiscal accountability and the financial integrity our citizens deserve. That's what I believe in, that's what I stand for, and that's what I'm running for. And I would appreciate your support. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here and participating. You know, Stanford's 120,000 people. When you run citywide, you realize very quickly that there are a lot of people to connect with, so thank you for being here tonight. My name is John Luizos. I grew up in Glenbrook. I grew up in my father's small business. He was an auto mechanic right behind Washington Boulevard near the Mill River. You know, I started working at my dad's shop when I was about 8 years old, and you know, I tell people about a tale of two cities. You know, I remember what Stanford was. You know, I remember how it was dark. I remember how there was crime. I remember how there was no business. I remember when you couldn't walk alone at night and feel safe. You know, I've also seen with my eyes, I've also seen what Stanford has become. You know, a tale of two cities. I am self-made. I went to college. I went to law school, first one in my family to do so. And I am actually, as we sit here on the dais today, the only candidate who is an attorney. I took the place of Jim Rubino, who's here today in 2005. The Finance Board has had an attorney. The last 2 years, it has not. And we've seen what a rudderless ship it has been over the last 2 years. Not only am I an attorney, but I'm actually an attorney that represents municipalities other than Stanford. So I have municipal experience. And not only am I an attorney who grew up in Stanford with municipal experience, but I also do business law, and I'm an economics major, and that's my background. So, you know, when I was vice chairman of the Finance Board, I did not miss a special meeting. I did not miss a regular meeting. I became vice chairman of the OPEB board because that was a difficult issue that I was not afraid to challenge. But you know what? I'm not dwelling on my past accomplishments. Even having been off the board for 2 years in 2009, I continued. I joined a nonprofit to benefit seniors in need. I've been working hard for that in 2 years. I joined the Child Care Learning Centers, working hard on that. And I have 2 new initiatives. The Little Things Mean a Lot initiative, and I also just obtained the Copper Beech tree for Mill River Park, freeing up $50,000 of money for more trees. And thank you for your support. Please come out November 8th. Thank you.
Thank you.
Save the best for last. Okay, my philosophy is simple. My philosophy is protect the Stanford taxpayers from large tax increases while maintaining vital government services. And my track record on the Board of Finance is proof of my fiduciary to taxpayers. The 2 years prior to me joining the board, taxes rose by a staggering 15%. The 2 years after I joined the board, the taxes rose only 1% per year. There's been a lot of discussion in this election cycle, and even here tonight, about a dysfunctional Board of Finance. I would argue that the board was truly dysfunctional when it allowed taxes to increase by 15% in 2 years. Now, the Democrats did control the board at that time. And you know what? There was no arguing, there was no fighting, just a rubber stamp and tax increases. And to me, that was a dysfunctional board. 2 years after I joined the board, the Democrats lost control. And according to the campaign rhetoric, those 2 years would have been categorized as dysfunctional. There was a lot of arguing, if anybody remembers, a lot of fighting, leveraging, bitter negotiations, and it was definitely controversial. Yet, the outcome was good for the taxpayers. The result, less than 1% tax increase per year for those 2 years. So to me, that in fact was a functional board as it is today. So based on the Democrats' track record over the last 15 years, They are willing to raise taxes and spend your money. I am not. So my pledge to you is this: when I'm reelected this year, I will continue to fight for the taxpayer of Stamford. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.